so just taking a minute, set the motivation. Taya taya om mune mune maha mune soa. Taya taya om mune mune maha mune soa. Taya taya om mune mune maha mune soha. Okay. So today we're going to take a little break from Mahamudra and Dzogchen and come back to it next week. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Dawa, which is the holy day coming up on Friday, and a little bit about some associated ideas. And so you don't have to remember anything I say today. It's just story time, right? So you can just relax and think about, Buddhists are funny, why do they do that? And I'll just give you some framework and some background knowledge. So Dawa is, they're Tibetan words meaning basically, Dawa means month, and Saka is related to one of the stars that's aligned at this particular time. And basically it's the holiday that celebrates the Buddha's birth, his enlightenment, and his Parinirvana, or his death. So it's celebrating all three at once, and it's celebrated according to the 15th month of the lunar calendar. But of course, people's ideas about the lunar calendar vary somewhat, and some schools of Buddhism celebrate it a slightly different time, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the Tibetan Buddhists celebrate it on Friday. But know that in subsequent years, it won't always be on this date because it's on according to the lunar calendar. Okay, so the Buddha's birth, death, and parinirvana. So you're remembering the beginning of the semester, the 12 deeds. This is basically saying that there are Buddhas everywhere, all the time, constantly, in your room right now, you know, pervading your computer, pervading your desk, you know, together with your dog. There are Buddhas everywhere, but it's unique for a Buddha to show a supreme Nirmanakaya form like Shakyamuni Buddha, because it's hard for the conditions to come together for sentient beings to have enough merit to see such a fully fledged Buddha. So it's not saying that there aren't always been Buddhas and always will be Buddhas, and that they're taking different forms. They might manifest as the leaders of many different religions. You know, Buddha, there could be a Buddha manifesting as Muhammad or Jesus or Moses. You know, we could say that there's an argument that these beings were bodhisattvas or Buddhas. We don't know. But for there to be the karma for everything to come together for us to see an enlightened being in front of us and to be able to recognize it is quite rare. So the next one to come will be Maitreya, who right now, you know, is in Tashida and still sends messages, you know, via Asanga and other practitioners, but he's not on this earth in front of us, tangible, relatable, able to talk to. So our most recent Buddha is Shakyamuni Buddha. So for us, Buddha Shakyamuni is very significant. He's the Buddha of ethics, and I think it's interesting, the next Buddha to come will be the Buddha of loving kindness. Of course, all Buddhas are equal in their qualities and equal in their abilities, but what they emphasize is different. So whether the fact that the Buddha of ethics is the one that is most recent means we particularly need to work on our ethics, or that we're particularly good at our ethics, who knows? Who knows? But he's the Buddha of ethics. The next one is the Buddha of loving kindness. So when we celebrate these days, what you'll see Tibetan Buddhists do is lay Buddhists, not monks and nuns, will take like 1-day vows. So it's kind of like you're a monk for a day vows, but it's with the Mahayana motivation. So, so monks and nuns might join in the ceremony because they already have those vows, but those vows are shared with all traditions of Buddhism. So then you take the same vows with a Mahayana motivation, it lifts them. So the vows are basically for that day, not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to engage in any sexual activity at all, to avoid all intoxicants, and then some extras which might be sort of perplexing, like not sitting on a high or expensive bed. Not eating food at the wrong times, not singing, dancing, or playing music. And then everyone's like outraged, right? What do you mean? Right. But you were all on board with the no killing, no stealing, but after that, I lost you. No, I'm kidding. So it's basically things that help you keep your senses steady. Yeah, so you basically taking vows to keep yourself really focused and undistracted, because some of these things are negative by nature and some of them are negative just by prohibition. They're not actually negative in and of themselves, but we acknowledge human nature and our relationship to these activities, and so we separate from them in order to be more focused, but we're not seeing them as negative in and of themselves. For example, alcohol is not seen as positive or negative, it's a neutral, an ethically neutral activity. But because under its influence we're more distracted, that means negative states of mind come more easily, it's harder to focus, harder to practice. So during the holy month of Dawa, particularly the main day on Friday, we refrain from it. Of course, monks and nuns don't ever drink alcohol, but for lay people, it's a good time to not. So it's an interesting experiment. Lots of people like to do this monk for a day business. Do monk for a day. Sometimes they do monk for a month. There's some traditions in Buddhism where you can be ordained for like 1 year. You take 1 year vows. In Thailand, they have that tradition where you can be, you can go to the military or you can be a monk, but for a year of your life, kind of doing something different to find yourself and know yourself better. It seems like an interesting idea. So those are the sort of things we'll get up to. We'll do vows, and then the practices that people do are they visit holy sites and make offerings at those holy sites. So this is very easily misunderstood because people will think that, I don't know, they're supplicating an angry God to ask them not to punish them or something. It looks really full on and it can look really pagan and it can look really bizarre. But really, you're becoming receptive to what you respect. So in these kind of holy days, visiting a place where a significant event happened reminds you that it's possible for you. You know, that's the main essence. You visit the holy site, you resonate with the energy of that holy site to remind yourself that I can become a Buddha. The point of my life is awakening, and it inspires you and lifts you because so many people have had those ideas and that energy in that spot. It kind of imbues it with some power. And then you make offerings, basically saying, this is what I value. This path is what I value. That, you know, the holy objects don't need your offering. It's for your own mind to kind of engender this attitude of respect. So yeah, the 1 day vows and visiting holy sites and making offerings. Sometimes there's polite, virtuous parties, you know, basically a puja where you'll all gather together and do prayers. And then at the end of it, you know, hang out and have a cup of coffee and bond and things like that. So Normally with Shantideva's study group, the Buddhist group that I work with here, we would do a big puja and then maybe have dinner together or hang out together. Not have dinner together on Sakadawa, but hang out together. Today, Friday, we're going to do it by Zoom, so if anyone's curious, you can join us. We're going to be doing prayers mostly in English this time. Sometimes we do them in Tibetan, so I'll send you the link if you're curious. You can just drop in. But basically, it's a time to remember that there was a Buddha. He taught the things. The things still exist. We can still do them. That's great news. That's great news. And yeah, it's a really happy day, even though it's, you know, it's his death as well as his birth and his enlightenment. It's just kind of remembering that such a remarkable being existed in this world and we can be him. So it's a nice time. So I thought that would kind of lead us to the discussion of the more mystical aspects of a supreme Nirmanakaya, because we were talking about the 4 Buddha bodies and the form bodies, which are for the welfare of all sentient beings, and some of them are accessible only by advanced practitioners, some of them are accessible by all levels of being. And what does it mean to be a supreme Nirmanakaya like Shakyamuni Buddha, as opposed to just a regular Buddha? And a supreme Nirmanakaya has what are called the 32 marks and 80 signs. And so this is just kind of a fascinating list of things, a list of characteristics. You can take it or leave it, but they're actually listed in your main text. So if you want to look on page 26, this is just something for interest. It's not like a list to memorize, it's just an interest. But I thought it might be worth going through it, so I included it in your materials just in case. So on page 26. So if you look, it says Sambhogakaya, then surroundings, field of enjoyment, form of enjoyment. Number 3, the body of enjoyment of Buddha Virachana and so forth. Marks, the marks that are possessed are 32 major and 80 minor marks. So, you know, there's so much of Buddhism that is accessible and scientific and logical and psychological, and then there are sides that are very mystical, and yet there is a logic underpinning them. So I thought to just go through this list and see what you make of it, and then I'm going to read you a little bit from Geshe Lodin's commentary about why these marks. Okay, and so jump in and ask if you've got questions. But it says, the 32 marks of a Buddha are: the palms of his hands and soles of his feet bear the signs of a wheel. So you maybe saw that in some of the meditations. There's wheels on the palms of his feet, on the palms of his hands and on the soles of his feet. And this is the result of, in previous lives, when an ordinary being, farewelling his Dharma teacher when he leaves and going to greet him on his arrival, serving him and so forth. Other causes are showing respect and caring for one's father and mother, one's abbot, one's teacher, sick people, and so forth. So when he was a regular person, before he was a Buddha, he was caring. And he was not just caring in a general way, he was caring to everyone and so when we talk about karma, there are particularly loaded relationships. As we know just in life, right? There are some relationships where a small argument is a much bigger deal than if you have the same argument with someone else. That an act of kindness has a greater impact with some people than that same act with someone else. So the idea is that very loaded karmic relationships are, of course, your teacher, because they're the one that offers you the tools to progress along the path. But also very heavy karmically are your parents, because they gave you your body. And this body is, whether you like it or not, incredibly precious and incredibly powerful for enacting the spiritual path. Because if you had animal parents, it'd be much harder for you to study. Yes. So, and they wouldn't help you at uni and anything like that. So other significant karmic relationships are like sick people. Yeah, sick people are particularly vulnerable. And so positive actions done towards sick people are more significant, as well as negative actions. So it's just interesting kind of, you know, karma ideas. So having done that, he has these wheels. His feet are as level as a tortoise. His feet are well set upon the ground like a tortoise, right? A big turtle. The soles of his feet are level and even. This is the result of in previous lives when an ordinary being, keeping firmly and perfectly the 3 sets of vows, Pratamoksha, Bodhisattva, and Vajrayana vows, as well as other commitments. So basically he kept his promises. Yeah, so when he was a regular person, before he was a Buddha, he kept his promises. Now that he's a Buddha, that's indicated by having quite flat, stable feet. Yeah, flat, stable feet. So he did vows for individual liberation, which are called Pratamoksha vows. He did Bodhisattva vows for the sake of all sentient beings. And he did Vajrayana vows, which are the tantric vows, which are like bodhicitta plus, that you don't just want to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. You want to do it quickly because they are suffering now. So he did all sets of those vows, and that's why he's got flat tortoise feet. Right, go figure. Okay, so then his fingers and toes are webbed. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, so like there's, you know, like a mermaid or something. He's got some sort of webbing between his fingers and his toes. And up to the first joint, but they're still able to wear rings. And this is the result of practicing the 4 means for gathering disciples, right, that we talked about before, practicing generosity, having pleasant speech, helping other people to practice, being consistent, that kind of stuff. Those 4 means that we talked about. You might think, well, I don't want to have webbed feet. I better stop practicing the 4 means of gathering disciples. I don't want webbed feet, but you know, the Buddha is in the nature of light. These are just kind of signs that indicate what he got up to as an ordinary person. The palms of his hands and soles of his feet are smooth and tender, which is the result of having offered abundant food and drink to others in previous lives. His body has prominent features, broad heels, hands, shoulder blades, and neck. This is like the 7 parts of his body are raised a little bit higher. And this is the result of offering abundance of soup and like to others. Why soup specifically? Soup's important. Go figure. You know, I read this and I'm like both delighted and amused and slightly like, what? I don't know what your reaction is, but there's something very touching to me about reading this, as well as sort of perplexing. But it is interesting to think everything has a cause. So everything about our own face, about our own features, everything is coming from a cause. It's not random. You know, you've got your genetics from your parents, but why do your siblings look different from each other? You know, when you've got the same parents, so your karma, it dictates which of those genetics are kind of coming forefront. For example, if you're beautiful in this life, that means in the past you were very patient, etc., etc. Doesn't mean you're still patient, but it means in the past you were patient, so that's good. All right, so his fingers are long, and so are his toes, and that's the result of freeing others from bondage and rescuing them from being killed. So he freed slaves, yeah, and he rescued people from slavery, and that is indicated by his long fingers and toes. He has broad heels, the result of protecting the lives of others and nursing them. He has a large and straight body, the result of having abandoned killing. His ankle bones are sort of unnoticeable, which, you know, so he's just got smooth ankles without the bones sticking out. And that's the result of having practiced giving and other virtues. His body hairs arch upwards. Yeah, so, you know, all of the little baby hairs everywhere, they go up. That's the result of having propounded to others the virtues that he practices himself. It's kind of interesting. His calves are like an antelope. You know, antelope is like a delicate sort of looking deer. It's the result of respectfully teaching others in the 5 major fields of study: grammar, medicine, the arts, logic, and philosophy. So sometimes this is referenced in Buddhism and sometimes it's not, but there are 5 major fields of study, and it's interesting that, you know, there are things like grammar and medicine, as well as the arts, logic, and philosophy, that these things are seen as important, even as the Dharma is important. It's not like we're saying that these things are unimportant. So he practiced those 5 other things and shared them with others. His hands are long and beautiful. The result of responding with generosity immediately to requests for material things and not sending beggars away empty-handed when he had enough to give. So as soon as someone asked, he would be right there helping.
It's his all the time. And in 13, we're going to talk about his male organs. Is a Buddha always a male?
They are no gender and all gender, but they take the aspect of certain genders because of the karma of the society they're in. So if the Buddha showed the aspect of being a woman 2,600 years ago, no one would listen to him. Right?
So Mitra is supposed to come as a woman because nobody listens to men right now.
Yeah, but in 2,000 years, maybe they'll have a revival. It's a bit like, Chenrezig is sometimes depicted as male, sometimes depicted as female, depending which culture you're looking at. Like when he's Kuan Yin, he's actually a she. And in Tibetan Buddhism, he's depicted as about 16 years old, and he looks kind of androgynous, like you really couldn't tell if he was male or female. So Buddhism, it sounds misogynistic sometimes, and there's cultures that are misogynistic and are all about the patriarchy, and that's a problem. But Buddhism itself was actually very balanced with gender equality as well as racial equality. The Buddha was quite famous for thinking that the caste system was complete rubbish, and he really actively spoke out against the caste system and that racism is stupid and blah blah blah. So he was ahead of his time, or of his time. But yeah, in this one he says his organ is modestly retracted inside, which is a result of encouraging others to lead an ethical life and helping reconcile friends, groups, and couples, especially by keeping secret any damaging things that they may have said about each other. So he has a male organ in this context, but it's retracted, indicating specific things. And when you look at Buddhist iconography, especially in highest yoga tantra, there's a great variation of these things being depicted, and it's always symbolic of something. And it's not like it's always depicted one way. So, they're a little bit more open and free about discussing these things than maybe we are in the West. It's not such a big deal to be like, okay, kids, today we're going to talk about the Buddha's male organ. And the kids are like, oh, okay, writing it down, as if it's a completely normal thing to talk about. Then his skin is golden colored. So it's not like it's golden colored like, I don't know, a Mediterranean person with kind of golden olive skin. It's more literally golden, like shiny, brassy, radiant golden. Just like Chenrezig is white, he's not Caucasian, he's like white, like a shell or a pearl. So this golden color is the result of giving others sufficient mattresses and other furniture. So basically he was very hospitable. He was very hospitable, and whenever people needed a place to stay and things to stay on, he always was making them comfortable. It's just a very intriguing list, like why these particular things. I think it's just something interesting to sit with. And his skin is thin and soft, the result of giving beautiful homes, palaces, and so forth. So in previous lives, he was a great philanthropist. He was a great benefactor, and he shared his home as well as giving others homes. His hairs, one by one, grow perfectly to the right. One by one means that each pore there is only one single hair, not two or more. And these hairs curl to the right. This is the result of abandoning multiple activities or distractions from Dharma practice. It's quite interesting. So it's indicating his focus. In the pictures of the Buddha, if you zoom in, especially his hair, you can see it's usually drawn with all of the curls of the hair going to the right. The rest of the hair isn't usually drawn because that would take forever, but it just shows that he was very focused and he didn't get swept up in worldly things when he was a practitioner.
Is there a reason why it's to the right?
There must be. There must be. Usually going to the right indicates method, and going to the left indicates wisdom. Going to the right indicates male, going to the left indicates female. So I think, I'm guessing it's some reference to that, but it doesn't say in the commentary. His face at the forehead is adorned with a hair treasure, which really means he has like a little coil of hair right between his eyebrows, like Frida Kahlo. So he has a little curl of hair. Sometimes it's depicted as just a bindu or like a third eye. Sometimes it's depicted in different ways, but apparently it looked like a curl of hair. And this is a result of making offerings to Dharma teachers, abbots, parents, and lamas, and revering them. His upper body is like a lion with broad shoulders, a deep chest, the result of practicing extensive virtuous deeds. His shoulder points are curved, a result of listening and acting in accordance to the good and sound advice of others. So that's interesting. Yeah, he was a good listener. And he took advice. You know, one of the reasons for reading all of these is just to indicate, in a way, it sounds like we're talking about his magic, but we're really talking about his humanness before he was enlightened. All of these things were things he did when he was just a regular human being before he was enlightened. And now they're shown in these kind of interesting aspects of a human-looking form. But really it's saying that this was a real person and he really practiced over many lives. And these are the kind of practices we should really think about and engage in because they're going to result in our awakening. So between his shoulders and neck is well developed, the result of providing doctors, medicine, and nurses to others. Even tastes that are not delicious appear as supremely tasty to him, which is the result of serving and nursing sick people. His body is symmetrical like a banyan tree, which is the result of building shelters, bridges, parks, and so forth for the purpose of the use of the populace. So he was a great architect at some point and did it not just for individuals, but he made, community architecture. He must have been like a community planner or something like this. His head has a crown protrusion, that bump up there. The result of previously offering temples, monks' quarters, and so forth, and providing homes for the homeless. He has a beautiful long tongue, the result of using soft, gentle, and compassionate speech previously for 3 countless great eons. So when he was a bodhisattva, he used gentle and compassionate speech for a really, really, really long time. Because 1 eon, the analogy is if you had a granite mountain and you wiped it once every 100 years with a silk cloth, by the time the granite mountain dissolved, an eon would have passed. So his voice is as melodious as Brahma's, a result of giving to beings in all the world systems the opportunity to hear the Dharma. So his cheeks are like a lion. The result of previously abandoning idle gossip and endless words. His teeth are very white, the result of having respected and praised others and not denigrated them. His teeth are even, the result of having abandoned the 5 wrong livelihoods and having been sustained by pure livelihood. Remember, we talked about wrong livelihood in the first semester, that from the sutra perspective, wrong livelihood is things like selling weapons, selling people, selling intoxicants, etc., etc. And then from the bodhisattva perspective, it was getting resources through like bribery or hypocrisy or blackmail, things like that. So he refrained from those. His teeth are well set, not falling out. The result of having always spoken the truth for 3 countless eons previously. His teeth are complete, being 40 in number. And then of course I immediately had to count my teeth and being like, I don't think I have that many teeth. The result of having abandoned divisive speech. His eyes are sapphire colored. So his eyes are blue, which often confuses people when they see Tibetan tankas. They're like, why has the Buddha got blue eyes? Wasn't he Nepali? And of course, when he was in human aspect, he just looked like a Nepali guy, but his supreme Nirmanakaya form, he was radiant golden and his eyes were sapphire. So it's not like a race thing. It's a, brilliant blue like sapphire jewels. A result of looking on all sentient beings equally, without bias, as being like one's only child. And then his eyelashes are like a magnificent heifer's, like a cow, right? If you've ever seen cow eyelashes, they're really impressive. The result of having for a long time treated others without anger, attachment, and so forth. So those are the 32 major marks of a Buddha. And then there's minor signs, and there's 80 of those. But what do you think when you hear this? What kind of response do you have?
It's very symbolic and inspiring. And you see how the body is connected to the spirituality. By the body, you see the inside qualities.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. By the outside, you can infer something about the inside. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I forget, there was some writer, I don't remember, maybe you guys remember, that says after a certain age, you're responsible for your own face. Remember? Right? And similarly, I think there are studies were done about, it was Mother Teresa specifically, but you could do it with anyone, that people just looking at her face, that their blood pressure would go down and they would relax just seeing her face. And I remember hearing about that study, many years ago now, and just being so inspired, because of course she was not conventionally beautiful, and she was already really, really old by that time, and she was all wrinkly. But as soon as you would look at her face, there was just this like, response. And whether that's our projections or her qualities or some combination of the two, I think it is interesting to look at the relationship between outer and inner like this. Yeah.
I felt it when I looked at the holiness, the Dalai Lama, this weekend.
Yeah, you just
Very
go
calm and
yep, same. Yep, you can. It happens. I love that it can happen even online. It can happen in person as well, where before His Holiness comes to start teaching, there's all this chaos and people finding their seats and talking to their friends and eating snacks, and it's all kind of a big mess. And then he comes and everyone just goes, and they settle down and they focus. And there's almost bliss that comes with it. It's beautiful. So we can be like that. And I think that there are times in our life already we are like that, if you're a bit shiny that day, I don't know if you have this expression in Hebrew, but if you're really happy and you're really loving and the people around you are like, you're just so beautiful today, but you haven't done anything different. You might not have even had a good night's sleep, but you're just like shining love out through all of your pores, and everyone is like, oh, you're so beautiful today. Yeah. And it's because your inner state is in alignment. Yeah. So do you want to hear about some of the 80 minor marks, or do you want to move on? Yeah, some just, why not? Okay, we do some.
Yönten, maybe, especially if people want to join the puja, maybe you can explain a little bit what to expect when joining a puja, and what is this kind of ceremony or prayer, or it is part of it is familiar to other prayers from other religions, but some of it is not. So maybe it's gonna be a good idea if somebody wants to join.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I'll send you the puja text, even if you don't come, just in case you're curious what we're going to talk about. But a puja is basically, it's like a prayer gathering where it's different to how I might lead a guided meditation. Basically, it's reading out loud. You're reading out loud, and what you're reading out loud is usually stories to make you happy, and then ways to make your mind in alignment with those stories. So you're basically saying, once upon a time, the Buddha did this and the Buddha did that, and wasn't that lovely? May we be like that by acknowledging our faults, here are some of our faults by rejoicing in our qualities. Here are some of our qualities by making offerings. Here's some beautiful offerings. And it's a lot less interactive teacher to the students. It's a lot more communal, everyone blending together. So there's one person leading, it'll be me leading it, but it's not like I'm going to be reading the room or trying to pace it according to everyone's needs. I'm just setting the pace that we all blend into. So like a Tibetan Buddhist retreat would be very, very different to how we do retreats, because we're basically doing the same thing 4 sessions a day from a practice manual, and we're just pausing to meditate at certain points, and it's a lot less conversational. Because the idea is that you've studied enough that these words have meaning. So you're not saying them just to say them, you're saying them because they have meaning for you, and they invite those qualities up to the surface. So it'll be about an hour and a half of reading out loud and brief pauses to meditate on what we've just read. And it's some people's cup of tea, and for other people it's not. Some people like the flow of it going in Tibetan. Some people prefer it in English or Hebrew. It's a very personal thing. So of course, it's more fun when we're all in the same room. So it's a little harder on Zoom, but at least, you see everybody's faces, and you're all reading from the same text, and you can actually have that sense of group practice experience once people kind of settle after the first 10 minutes and they kind of settle and synchronize. You can still feel that kind of group energy happen. So lots of different kinds of pujas, but this particular one, Shakyamuni Buddha Puja, that we'll do is very straightforward. Yeah, and it's less highest yoga tantra than most of our pujas. It's more sutra level.
What does it mean, straightforward?
Straightforward, like if you were to read the prayers, it would remind you of things that we've studied. Whereas some pujas, you would read some of the prayers and be like, what is that referring to? I don't even know what that means. What? And it would still remind you of things you've studied, but there would be a few layers to get to that. So yeah, it's straightforward in the sense that it'll be relatively familiar content, but quite a different style than our normal meditation. Basically, less is explained because the assumption is that you've done study before doing the meditation. So a lot of our meditations, there's explaining together with the point you're supposed to sit with. It's like, here's the point, meditate on patience is a good idea. And you're like, yep, patience is a good idea. Wait, why? And then I'll say, patience is a good idea because blah, blah, blah. And then your mind says, oh yeah, that's right, I agree with that, sitting with that. Whereas after a while, you get into meditations where there's very little explained because the assumption is that you're bringing your knowledge to the points. Yeah. Or that you might get an explanation outside of the meditation session.
Yönten, in a way, all these ritual symbols and maybe even the vowels and are more for our human side, let's say, yeah, our relative side, because if we get the ultimate, we don't need vowels, right? Like you said, alcohol in itself, if we talk about simple example, is not bad. If we can drink it, in a smart drink, it could be good. The old guy in the story, Buddhist story, that took the woman across the river. You can say he didn't act as his vow, but this was the need. And so all these holding too tight these maybe symbols or vowels, it's more for the human part of the path. It's not the essence of the path.
But it's hard to touch the essence of the path unless you do it. It's very easy to fool yourself and think, I'm just going to go straight to the ultimate, to hell with these forms, right? Because it's like you fool yourself You know, it's like an alcoholic saying, I can have just one, you know, right? These vows, what they do is they go in levels of coarse to subtle. So the coarse vows, like lay people vows, are about like physical behaviors that normally cause harm, though not from their own side, not ultimately, not in and of themselves, but generally they cause harm. So they're behaviors to stop doing. Then the bodhisattva vows are about behaviors to stop doing that are more subtle, and then going into mental behaviors to stop doing. Yeah, so it's going from like coarse physical to subtle physical to coarse mental. And then the Vajrayana vows, the tantric vows, are about refraining from subtle mental attitudes that are destructive. And then, of course, as you say, you won't need any vows at all once you're a Buddha or approaching Buddhahood, or once you've realized emptiness directly, even, you don't need any vows. But up until that point, I think that there is something we're sitting with, that there is power in promises. You know, there's power in promises because they cut off escape routes for your ego. And you don't want to hold fundamentally or with fundamentalism to them. So like in the example you were giving about the monk carrying the woman across the water, his coarse vows, his pratamoksha vows, his vows for individual liberation, those are foundational vehicle level. So all monks and nuns have vows of the foundational vehicle, and then they pile on top of those bodhisattva vows and pile on top of those tantric vows. So he was technically breaking a lower vow, but he wasn't breaking a higher vow because his bodhicitta attitude said it's much more important to save her than to worry about not touching women. As you become more integrated, as you become more spacious and aware, you become more subtle until eventually you can let go of all of this. But that doesn't negate the fact that for most of us, we need to look at the things that are usually triggering. And is there an argument to be made for separating ourselves from them, even if only for a short period of time, just to break the spell? So for example, like the layperson vows that we can take during Sakadawa, to refrain from singing and dancing and playing music for one day, you might think, well, that's easy. I could stop doing that for one day. You know, you're not a compulsive dancer, right? Or maybe you are, but you know, there's, it doesn't seem like it would be hard to say for one day I won't. But as soon as you tell yourself you can't, then you want to. Yeah, then you start getting songs in your head and you're singing without even realizing it. Even if you haven't sung for 2 weeks, suddenly today you really want to. You haven't danced for months or years, suddenly you're dancing around your kitchen. You know, and what it does is confront what your attachment says you need in order to be happy. So by withdrawing from activities that your attachment says you need in order to be happy, you're confronted with your own inner lies, basically. And it's very fascinating. And then once you've kind of broken the spell, you could go back to singing and dancing and playing music, no problem, because they're not negative in and of themselves, but you've broken the spell of attachment.
In Yom Kippur, when you don't eat, you think about eating, so I can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not deprivation for its own sake, right? It's not deprivation in order to punish yourself. You know, you're not saying I'm not allowed because I'm bad and I'm a sinner and I should be punished. You're saying I'm not going to because I gave it too much power. You know, I gave it too much power. So you're not going to have sex for a whole day. There's tons of days in your life where you didn't have any sex, but now you're saying today, none. Now all of your issues come up. And you thought that you dealt with it because, you know, it had been months you hadn't even worried about it. But now today you're not allowed. Oh my God, you know, freak out. Right, this is what happens. So it's not about any kind of punishment. It's about breaking the spell of outside activities, outside objects, inner habitual patterns, because otherwise we don't really see them if we're not confronted by, what if I just stopped? It can be really useful. Yeah.
I thought that my problem with the vows is that I think that attachment is not to singing or dancing, but to choice, to the option you have to dance and to sing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you're choosing to take vows. Nobody is making you take them. But once you've chosen, then it does do interesting things to your mind. I don't know, you guys could have a conversation about how your relationships were before you got married and after you got married, and what happened in your mind, having made a big promise, or before you decided to start this program and after you decided to start this program. The idea of it and the actual doing of it. There's interesting things where, even though it was voluntary, even though you decided, even though you did it on purpose, once you've made a big choice, everything that is not that choice starts to become very tempting. But until you made the choice, you didn't even realize how tempted you were about other things, maybe. So it's worth experimenting with. What does it do to the mind to just shift activities, shift mentalities, even if only for one day, just to experiment with, what does my mind do? Because choice isn't interesting. It's really interesting to play with. Often people say to me, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this. And I want to say, well, I did choose this, No one held a gun to my head, right? I did choose this. And most of the time it's a great freedom. And if it feels like a prison, it's because my mind went weird. It'll pass, right? Usually it's a great freedom. I often think of vows like one of those structures that you put around a tomato plant, that if you put it around the tomato plant, it's going to grow upward and strong and robust, and then maybe eventually it doesn't need it. But if you don't put up one of those things, the tomatoes are going to grow all over the place, and they might be kind of less juicy and less well-formed. There'll still be growth, right? They will still grow, but it'll be all kind of messy and chaotic and not in the direction that we want. Obviously unbiased, because I'm a vow addict.
But I think what you're saying, maybe that vows keep you on the path. But there's something in the sense of that every time you confront them, vows are there to confront, but then to realize and continue on the path.
Exactly. It's like it's what you already want to do. It's not you're not vowing to do something different than you already want to do. It's just by promising to, you have a continuity and a progress, and you're less likely to give up on your path and just kind of make excuses for not. It is difficult, but it's something that keeps the mind more organized, because a lot of decisions have already been made. They're not decisions you have to keep coming back to. Should I do this or not? You already decided. It frees up room for other things. I don't know, is it like that for a happy marriage? You've decided, this is the one. Now I don't have to think about all these other possible partners. I picked one. Now I'm solid. That's off my list. Frees up space. I don't know.
There is this Zen story that says the trap exists for the rabbit. When you caught the rabbit, you don't need the trap anymore. And the bait exists for the fish. When you have already caught the fish, you don't need the bait anymore. And the words exist for the meaning. When you caught the meaning, you don't need the words anymore. So I thought about it when you talked about the vows.
Yeah, that's a good framing. I like it. Look, it is interesting. And it doesn't, there's taking vows from someone, but there's also just promises you make to yourself. And then there's, purification practice of the tiny promises we try to make to ourselves every day. And, they all have an impact. Yeah, Karina, yeah?
Yeah, I think that deciding to be a therapist, a psychotherapist, is taking a vow. And I think that every time we come into the room, we act upon that vow in the room, outside the room. But we know something even in our secular life, okay, about taking upon ourselves responsibilities of, in Judaism there is 613 do's and not do's. Okay, so and I think it is important to. And I think that it's not just, what not to do, like not to drink alcohol, not to have sex, not to kill, which is kind of a boundary. I think that the do's, like take the responsibility to be there for others, is kind of vows that are more like the bodhisattva vows, that we know something about, of the taste. It's not that not familiar to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I assume that would be the case. It is just, it's the question of what does your ego do when you cut off an escape route? Whatever it is. When you said, from this point onward, I am oriented this way, towards this and away from that. That is what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll get distracted, sometimes I'll forget, but my main orientation is this, not that. Then there is some sort of inner conflict and then resolution, a conflict and a resolution and then an integration. And then probably every, 3 to 5 years, there's a little bit of a rumble of reassessing your promises and going, yeah, okay, still a good idea. But, there can be a little rumble every, 3 to 5 years. And then it goes to a deeper level and a deeper level. And, the spiritual dark nights of the soul, as they put it in Christianity, these happen, but at the end of them is a new freedom. So what looks like restriction winds up being freedom. Yeah. So it can sound very do this, don't do that. But the thing is also in Buddhism is no one is checking, right? There's not like a guy with a clipboard going, have you kept your vows today? Tick, tick, tick. No one is checking. No one cares. It's completely your business. So you can lie to yourself if you want to, but you're the one that is harmed by that. So in the monasteries, there's a disciplinarian who's supposed to, help keep the community in line. And really their main job is just harmony. It's not going around going, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. It's not like that, not like a school teacher. It's about facilitating harmony between members of the community. The specific vows are so much everyone's own personal practice and personal relationship that it's almost like, in a way, disrespectful to ask about someone else's, how are you keeping vow number 304? It's like none of your business. But what is important is community harmony. All right, let's do some of the 80 mighty marks just because it's interesting and we probably won't have time another time to look at these. So a conqueror's nails are copper colored, no nail polish needed. The main cause is being completely free of desirous attachment to all compositional factors. Compositional factors are phenomena which are neither form nor consciousness. Examples include persons, habit, life, time, etc. And his nails are glossy, they're shiny. The main cause is superior intention to benefit all beings. The nails are raised. The cause is the merit for birth in a superior lineage such as that of a universal king. So basically meaning that they have enough merit to be taken seriously for people to listen to them. We know there's lots of people who say good, wise, important things, but that doesn't mean people hear them or listen to them. But occasionally there's someone with enough merit or enough good karma that those same words are finally heard by society. The fingers are rounded. The cause is being completely free of negativities, of actions of the body. The fingers are well developed from previous completion of accumulation of fundamental virtues. The fingers are tapered from completely achieving the realizations of the 3 vehicles in a sequential manner. For example, first one would attain a hearer's realization of the wisdom directly perceiving the selflessness of the person, in the sense of the person as not being self-sufficient. Then one would attain the solitary realizer's realization of the wisdom directly perceiving the emptiness of all duality. Finally, one would progress to the bodhisattva's realization of the emptiness of true existence, the emptiness of inherent existence of all phenomena. So They have gone through all the tenets, which you'll do next semester. Their veins are not visible, and that's from abstaining from the 10 non-virtuous actions and from wrong livelihood. And the veins are not knotted from becoming free of distortions of delusions. The insides of the ankles don't protrude, so not just the outer bones, but the inner bones, is from achieving the realization of the very subtle secret topics and not revealing them to those who are yet unfit. The distinction between this and the 9th major sign is that the major sign refers to the outer or larger ankle bone, whereas this minor mark refers to the inner or smaller ankle bone. So what's said here basically is you don't teach things that are too advanced for people to understand so that they turn into having wrong views. You know, so you can teach things to people that they don't understand yet, and they're just confused or annoyed or whatever, or curious or inspired. But if you push people too far, too fast, things that are too advanced for them, they can generate wrong views and then have obstacles in their path. So it's really about this ability to read what people are able to be receptive to. That makes sense. So that's a quality we all are working on. The legs are even in length from liberating beings from samsara and so forth, and traversing paths difficult to cross over. He walks in the style of a lion, completely fearlessly, from having perfected the skill of outshining other humans. He walks in the style of an elephant that cannot be overcome, from having perfected the skill of dominating ferocious nagas, these beings in the spirit realm. He moves in the style of a bird, expert in flying through space, from having previously led others, like a leader of a flock, leads all birds across the ocean and continents to their destination. He walks in the style of the leader of a group, from having perfected the skill of leading sentient beings out of samsaric existence. He walks to the right side because he walks clockwise when doing circumambulation, because that is the correct direction to walk in such circumstances. Like that, the Buddha always walks in exactly the correct direction. So this is kind of an interesting one. Maybe you've seen pictures of people going clockwise around holy objects in Bodh Gaya and Dharamsala, etc. Going clockwise is, in a way, it's indicating respect. You know how our right arm is out and our left arm is covered? The right arm, because most people are right-handed. To have it open like this, you can tell that I'm not carrying any weapons. So I'm showing that I'm safe. To have it uncovered is kind of showing that aspect of respect. So we have our right arm towards holy objects when we walk around them as a sign of respect. So that's what's meant here by circumambulating or going in a circle clockwise. So, you know, other religions might go the opposite direction, and that probably has a significance and a good meaning as well. It's not like right or left is good or bad in and of itself, but in our context, this is why, right? He walks beautifully and elegantly from having perfected skills in beautifying. He walks erect, straight up, without swaying, from having completely abandoned crooked minds of cunning and so forth. So he's not manipulative. He is well built and attractive from expressing the good qualities of others. His complexion is glowing as if having been polished from his actions of body, speech, and mind, not having been tainted by negativities. He is well proportioned from having given teachings to suit the mindset of trainees. His body is clean from the behavior of his body, speech, and mind having been pure. His body is smooth from having possessed great compassion. His body is pure from his mind having been completely purified of all defilements. All signs are complete from having complete practice of ethics which overcomes delusions and conceptual elaborations. The limbs of his body are perfectly proportioned from having extensively praised the good qualities of others. His steps are even from having maintained the even mind of equanimity toward all sentient beings. His 2 eyes are clear from having taught the pure Dharma. His appearance is youthful for having taught the Dharma with examples that make it easy to understand. His body is not weak from his mind not having been discouraged from undertaking any difficult task. His body is well developed from his virtues having been completely superior to those of all ordinary beings. His body is very firm from having eliminated the karma for taking rebirth in samsara. His limbs are appropriately distinct, as are the fingers and toes, from having clearly and distinctly given teachings on dependent arising in both the forward and reverse order, and for the purpose of liberating living beings from samsara. So this is talking about the 12 links. He taught them the forward direction, the reverse direction, every which way to help people understand. His vision is unobscured and clear from having given teachings which clarify the meaning of higher status and definite goodness. His waist is round from having made his followers pure and ethical. His waist is moderately sized from having not been tainted by the faults of samsara. His waist is not too long from having overcome the inflatedness of pride. His belly is flat from having given inexhaustible teachings. His navel is deep from having realized the meaning of profound Dharma. The navel curls to the right from having given teachings to disciples according to their mindset and inclination, so like the belly button swirl. His behavior is perfect from causing his entourage to behave beautifully in body, speech, and mind. His actions are pure through having a pure mind without contamination. There are no moles or black marks or freckles on his body through having avoided giving unsuitable teachings and avoided teaching at a time when the disciples are not yet ripened sufficiently to benefit. The hands are as smooth as cotton through giving teachings which deeply move the disciples' body, speech, and mind and cause bliss to arise within them. The hands have lines that are clear through having attained the status of a great virtuous being. Attainment of this title is due to having practiced unbiased equanimity toward oneself and others. The hands have lines that are deep through having completed the realization of the profound Dharma. The hands have lines that are long through having constantly given teachings which benefit both temporally and ultimately. His face is not too long through giving teachings to disciples which accord with their inclinations. His lips are as red as the bimba fruit through having realized all phenomena, all environments, and the beings therein as mere reflection. The tongue is pliant through having subdued his disciples with soft, gentle teachings. The tongue is thin through giving teachings to disciples using limitless forms of reasoning. The tongue is red because of giving profound teachings which overcome delusions and which are beyond the comprehension of those childish beings attached to I and my. His voice is thunderous through being free from fears, doubts, and so forth. His voice is flexible and smooth through giving teachings which are sweet to the ears. His cuspids are round through having completely abandoned the attachment and so forth which bind one to cyclic existence. Those are the sharp teeth. His cuspids are sharp through having subdued beings who have strong delusions and are difficult to subdue. His cuspids are white through having overcome delusion with pure white Dharma. His cuspids are even from having abided in a state where samsara and nirvana are realized to be equal and being empty of inherent nature. They're tapered through leading disciples progressively through the 3 vehicles. His nose is prominent through possessing supreme wisdom, realizing emptiness, endowed with method. His nose is clean and clear through having faithful, pure disciples. His eyes are wide through giving countless extensive Mahayana teachings. Eyelashes thick through liberating countless beings from the bondage of cyclic existence. His eyes are like a lotus petal through having satisfied the youth of the human, demigod, and god realms. His actions cause even the youth who are difficult to subdue to praise him, so he convinces even teenagers. His eyebrows are long through constantly watching the future situation of living beings. His eyebrows are smooth through having led beings with skillful teachings, in contrast to the Forder's leaders' beings in the practice of austerities, such as the 5 fires and so forth. The eyebrows are lustrous because his mental continuum is moist with virtues. The eyebrows have even hairs through always seeing the faults of delusions. His hands are long and well developed through completely overcoming the general sufferings of samsara and its causes. His ears are equal through becoming virtuous over the delusions which are difficult to overcome, like desire and so forth. The ear sense power is completely without degeneration through ripening the continuum of sentient beings and establishing them in the state of happiness. His forehead is well defined because his mind cannot be moved or changed by the 62 wrong views, other extreme views, and so forth. His forehead is broad through having defeated all exponents of false views. The head is well formed through all his prayers for the welfare of others being realized. His hair is black as a bee through overcoming attachment to the 5 sense objects, forms, and so forth. His hair is thick through having completely abandoned the objects of abandonment on the paths of seeing and meditation. The hair is smooth through having complete non-conceptual realization of emptiness. The hair is untangled because his mind is not confused by desire and so on. The hair is not rough through having completely abandoned coarse and abusive language. The hair is fragrant from having made offerings of fragrant flowers and so forth to the 3 jewels. The endless knot and auspicious signs, his body is beautified through the palms of his hands and soles of his feet, being adorned with the endless knot and auspicious signs. These minor signs reflect the inner qualities of Buddhas as evidenced through the external signs. They both have causes and results. That's the end of story time. So someday when we're all grown up, we're going to be like that. And it'll be great and will be of benefit. So that's just interesting, and take it or leave it, but...
Not imagine a walk like a lion, like an elephant, like a goose, like a... I just cannot imagine how a person moves like this.
Gracefully. Gracefully.
But very different animals, so...
Yeah, grounded and graceful. Yeah, and then I was trying to think of some of my teachers, and, we have the karma to see what we see. So, of course, during the time of the Buddha, some people could see all of this glory, all of this radiance. They could see every aspect and were just like in awe. And some people just saw a sweet Nepali man with a shaved head and clothes like mine, who was, just looked like a regular Nepali guy, And some of them would have thought that he was lovely and beautiful, and some of them would have thought he was ugly, and everybody's projections, etc., etc. So it's very much dictated by our karma, how much we can see. Of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if we had purified karma, he would look like Thousand-Armed Chenrezig. We're lucky that we can even see the sweet old man and see, a face that gives us such peace. Some people see him and they think he's a demon, so it's interesting. Right, so next week we'll go back to looking at Mahamudra meditations. So if you feel like reading ahead from where we started from on Monday, go ahead, but we'll also read some of it in class. So as you like, and just take a minute and dedicate all of this merit that we put into hearing and contemplating. May it go towards the development of our fullest potential so that we can be of benefit to all living beings. Thanks, guys.